Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. We're Tushiyah Life Ministries, where we present sound wisdom for a successful walk. Thanks for joining us today. We're taking the light of the word to the world to edify, equip, and empower disciples and apostles of Yeshua. And each week, we ask the Father in Yeshua's name that you would speak to our hearts, give us a clear, accurate, relevant, and edifying understanding as we set the stage for a new series that we're going to enter in today. Open our ears, open our eyes, and get our heart and hands ready to receive, believe, and accomplish what you are calling us to, Father. We ask this in Yeshua's name. Amen. We're starting a series that we call Everyday Apologetics. And in that, we're going to be going through and over some things to help you become firmer in your own belief in Yahweh and through his son Yeshua, how you can communicate that effectively to other people. And we're going to show you that it's important to know something about the people you're talking with. It's mostly important to know about yourself and to be able to comfortably present a compelling explanation for why you believe what you believe, but you can also field or receive any questions they might ask you about what you believe. One of the biggest things is we like to give a testimony and we like to give one-way communication, but that's not what God intended. He intended us to have conversations. And so this is part of what we're doing at Tushiyah Life Ministries to help you with those conversations. And so we're going to begin by telling you what we understand apologetics is. It's based on 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15, which reads, "Sanctify Messiah as Lord in your hearts, always being ready to make a defense," which is a response, "to everyone who asks you to give an account or a reason for the hope that's in you, yet with gentleness and reverence," or with respect. The Greek word behind defense in this passage is the word apologia. Apologia. Our current term, apology, is based on it, but it doesn't mean to say I'm sorry for something. It literally means to give a defense or an answer, a response. Apologetics attempts to respond to inquiries or assaults on what we believe using evidence-oriented scriptural, historical, and reasonable arguments rather than ones that are just based on faith alone. Well, I just believe it. The Father has given us much more than just believe it to go on. Our working definition for apologetics will be the ability to provide a clear, concise, and compelling response when asked what I believe and the reason why I believe it. So often we can't really clearly communicate why we believe something. We should be able to do that, and we're going to give some help and some pointers on that as we go through our series. Now, according to 1 Peter 3:15, unlike some apologists I've seen, apologetics is not learning how to biblically disarm, dismantle, and destroy people who believe differently than we do. The Father doesn't beat them over the head with a bat, although that time may come if they don't make any change along the way, but it's to show the way with care. I say care is an acronym: clarity, accuracy, relevance, and edification. In Acts 18, 24, and 26, I like to use the approach just like Priscilla and Aquila used with Apollos, when they took Apollos, the eloquent Alexandrian preacher, aside and explained to him the way of God more accurately, that is, in fuller detail. Here, they took the offensive without being offensive. When should we apologize, or that is, present our defense for our faith? Well, it says, when you're asked. Our lifestyle, not lip service, should give people a reason to want to reach out to us. However, to present a good apology, you need a firm grasp on what you believe. So if you're asking, someone asks you these same questions, you can provide a clear, concise, and compelling response as to what you believe and why you choose to believe it. Some of the things that we should know involve the person of the belief system, the forerunner or source. Where did you get your information from? Actually, who did you get your information from? Then there is the premise of the belief system. What's the foundation? What is it standing upon? What is the substance that makes it what it is? And then after that, we have what's the purpose of the belief system? What's the focal point? What's the strategy? Where are they going with this? And then there's the plan of the belief system, the framework or the structure. How does this thing work? And lastly, there is the promise of the belief system, the fruit or the results. When it's all summed up, where does it lead you? And that's the thing. You want to know for yourself, as well as when you're talking with other people, who told them what they did? What did they tell them? Why did they tell them that? How does it work? And what are the end results? Now, our focus is going to be in our everyday apologetics, beginning with this first portion of the series, is to tell you 3 things you need to know, because we're going to be taking an honest look at Hebrew Israelites. Yes, we're going to be talking about taking an honest look at Hebrew Israelites. So there are 3 things you need to be aware of when you begin to hold a conversation with one. And let me say this, if they don't want to hold a conversation, don't try to. Unless 2 people want to have a conversation, then only one's going to be talking and saying what they want. You don't have to stay there for that. And likewise, they don't have to for you either. So you want to have a conversation. But those 3 things are: 1, Black Hebrew Israelites, also called African Hebrew Israelites, Black Jews, Black Hebrews, Black Israelites, or Hebrew Israelites, depending upon which camp you're talking to, is an umbrella term for the belief that the descendants of Africans in America, and some of them include Native people and Hispanics in North America, are descendants from the lost tribes of ancient Israel. Some will say it's Judah, some will say it's the lost 10 tribes, some will say it's all 12. It depends on the group. The second thing, while there are some common beliefs shared by the different camps, and that's how they refer to themselves as camps, they vary widely in their connection to Judaism and Christianity. There are 3 primary groupings or camps, not groups, but groupings, because again, there's no one overall belief system for them, except a few main points. One grouping maintains a Christian theological perspective, and they adopt Jewish rituals. A second one adheres to a more traditional Judaism in their practice. And a third grouping focuses more on nationalism and is furthest away from traditional Judaism or Christianity. And the third thing, they emphasize the King James Version of the Bible. They'll say it's the 1611 version as their only rule of faith and practice. It's more like it's really the 1769 version. And I'm only being technical because most people would have an extremely difficult time reading a 1611 King James because we don't read Elizabethan English. And the King James Bible is an English Bible, not an American Bible. But they like that version because it has the Apocrypha in it. I know I've heard some people say, why did they take some books out of the Bible? And most of them are referring to the Apocrypha because in about 1885, the Apocrypha was removed. But the Roman Catholic, Eastern Orthodox, and Oriental Orthodox churches still include the Apocrypha in their version of the Old Testament. Please understand this. It was never a part of the Hebrew Bible, that is the Old Testament, and it was never a part of the New Testament writings. One group of people decided to add these books in, and someone says they shouldn't have been there, so they took them back out. So they weren't removed from the Bible, they were removed from a place they should never have been in. But let's begin with our honest consideration, our honest look at who is Israel, because that's what it is. When they talk about Black Hebrew Israelism, it's about who is really Israel or the true Jews. But first, I want to give us just a little bit of criteria. So as we look, we'll know what we're measuring them up against. Exodus chapter 19, verses 5 and 6 read, "So now then," as Yahweh is speaking to Moses, "if you will indeed listen to my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be my treasured possessions among all peoples. For all the earth is mine, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the sons of Israel." In Exodus chapter 12, verse 38, it tells us it was a mixed or foreign multitude. That means the people who were at the foot of Mount Sinai some were direct descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel. Some were mixed bloodline descendants, and some were non-bloodline descendants. But to any person, regardless of whether you are a direct, mixed, or not even a bloodline descendant, you become a part of God's holy nation by grace through faith. Yep, I'm sure you've heard that phrase before. It's true. And it began in Exodus 19. So let's see where the roots of Hebrew Israelism begins. The roots of Black Hebrew Israelism can be traced to about the year 1888. Let me say it again, 1888. So we're saying less than 150 years ago. A Black man by the name of William Christian was first to preach that Adam and Eve were the starting point of the Black people, that Jesus is Black, and that the freed slaves, because this was right after slavery, slaves were freed in America, the freed slaves were descendants of the biblical Hebrews. He founded a church called the Church of God and Saints of Christ. Even though he thought Black skin was a sign of the covenant between God and his people, he taught racial equality in his congregations. Now, I'm going to say some things and share some things with you, and you're probably going to do like some dogs might do when they go, huh? Yes, you need to understand these pieces of the puzzle because we're setting the stage, and then as we begin to construct an honest structure of what Black Hebrew Israelites in general and specifically believe, you'll understand whether or not they're consistent with what we know to be what it takes to become a member of Israel, a true Israelite. In 1892, a man who was known as Prophet William Saunders Crowdy, he was a Freemason there in Guthrie, Oklahoma. He had a vision from God where he was in a room and there were several tables around, and there were different size tables, but one of the things he noticed was that all these tables were covered with filth. But there was one table a little bit smaller, and it was clean enough for a person to sit down and eat. He went over to the table, and then he saw a sign there, and it read, Church of God and Saints of Christ. I just heard that name. So he sat down at that table and began to eat. 4 years later, in 1896, he founded the Church of God and Saints Tabernacle in Kansas. And as he traveled throughout the United States, he taught the 10 lost tribes of Israel were the ancestors of Black people. And he taught that Yeshua, that is Jesus, was Black. The majority of his followers out west leaned more toward a Christian theology and were white. The more Eastern congregations closer to the Atlantic Ocean were more like Jewish congregations, and they didn't believe in the Trinity nor the deity of Christ. If you're unfamiliar with that term, deity of Christ, that's when people say that he is the God-man, God and man at the same time. That's what they're referring to. His meetings, that is, Crowdy's meetings, blended some Jewish practices such as gathering on the seventh-day Sabbath and other honoring or observing the appointed times listed in Leviticus 23. And they had foot washing, and the sacred or holy kiss between members was accepted, which was controversial in the late 1800s and early 1900s. But you see, he mandated racial integration in his congregations. His movement, like William Christian before him, was highly anti-racist. And in 1899, he moved his church headquarters to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. You're going to want to remember that location for a later time. Then came a huge shift with a man named Frank S. Cherry. He claimed to get a vision from God that the Africans in America are the true descendants of the biblical Hebrews. He established the church. Okay, wait a minute, let me take a breath, because these church names are like kind of long. The Church of the Living God, Pillar of Truth for All Nations. He established it in Chattanooga, Tennessee, which he later relocated in 1915 to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He also combined elements of Judaism like Passover with Christian commitments, such as the centrality of Christ, but his message was aggressive and nationalistic. He also taught that God, Adam, Eve, and Yeshua were all Black. He believed and taught that white people were inherently evil. Remember now the time, barely into the 1900s. And they taught that Yeshua would end the world by the year 2000 with a race war. Since he was Black, he was going to get rid of all the white people. This is what they taught then. Cherry also taught, put your seatbelt on, that white people were the descendants of Gehazi. He was the minister or the assistant to Elisha. And they say that they descended from him because Gehazi was cursed with leprosy as white as snow. 2 Kings 5:27. Cherry also believed that after AD 70, when the temple in Jerusalem was destroyed by the Romans, that the Jews fled into Africa and moved towards the West Coast, where they were captured and eventually sold to slave traders from Europe. Now, Christian and Crowley before him taught that there were Black and white descendants of Israel. Their teaching was more reliant on getting revelation from God, racial integration, and more traditional Christian theology on a spectrum, but it was more of an inclusive message for all people. But Cherry, who also was a 33rd degree Scottish Rite Mason, had a very exclusive message. He taught only the Blacks in the Northern Hemisphere were the descendants of Israel. Cherry said the fair-skinned Jews, again, before 1915, the fair-skinned Jews were of the synagogue of Satan, spoken of in the book of the Revelation. His teaching more dependent upon pseudo-scholarship, segregation, and moving away from Christianity. Moving up to 1919, a man who was known as Rabbi Wentworth Arthur Matthew, a West Indian, that is a man from the Caribbean islands, founded, let me take a deep breath for this church name, Commandment Keepers Ethiopian, let me start again, sorry. Commandment Keepers Ethiopian Hebrew Congregation of the Living God, Pillar and Ground of Truth, Incorporated. This group believes the biblical patriarchs, that is the 12 sons of Israel, were all Black. And, put your seatbelt on again, the people of Ethiopian descent, because the Ethiopians claim King Solomon and Queen of Sheba are their ancestors, that they represent one of the lost tribes of Israel. Though influenced by Garveyism and Ethiopianism, Rabbi Matthew established a Christian church that taught Black Israelism and incorporated Old Testament rituals and practices like observing the seventh-day Sabbath, appointed times observances, and eating kosher, along with Freemasonry, Kabbalah, which is Jewish mysticism, a holiness movement, and spiritualism were all a part of what they practiced in his churches. His congregation referred to themselves as Ethiopian Hebrews. He taught that the Hebrews were Black and that white people are descendants of Esau. Over time, they began to put less emphasis on Yeshua and greater emphasis on their Hebrew identity. By the 1960s, Yeshua was pretty much eliminated from their doctrine. Point. By the 1960s, yes, there are still members of Commandment Keepers group and of Cherry's radical group, but we'll get a little bit more to that in a minute. Not a minute, but in a bit. Then we have the man who bears my first name, Jamaican-born Marcus Garvey, and his United Negro Improvement Association, the UNIA. While Garvey wasn't a Hebrew Israelite, he did promote Black nationalism. Some of his nationalistic pride was fueled by the war in 1896, a victory where the Ethiopians, aided by the Russians, pushed back an invasion from Italy, who were helped by the British. Ethiopia then and now is Black control from start to finish, top to bottom. And they were sort of like a model that people of color, Blacks, wanted to follow. Then we have Rabbi Arnold Josiah Ford, a Barbadian. Notice a lot of West Indians are involved in this now. A Barbadian-American Black rabbi with membership as a master of the Memon Lodge in the Scottish Rite Masons and musical director of Marcus Garvey's Universal Negro Improvement Association. He founded two ministries, if you will, the first being the Moorish Science Temple, if you've heard of the Moors, and later established Beth B'nai Abraham. The services that he held were a mixture of Reform and Orthodox Judaism. Note, he included elements of Israelite, Masonic, and Islamic practices in his different services. Additionally, he replaced the term Negro with Ethiopian as a general reference to people of African descent, and preferred the term Hebrew or Israelite to differentiate themselves from the white Jews. So if I call myself a Hebrew or an Israelite, that means I'm a Black Jew, and if I don't, I'm a white. If you're starting to get confused, don't, just stay with me. This same Josiah Ford is the one who drew up the certificate of ordination, or authority as it's called in Hebrew, for Rabbi Matthew to be a rabbi. I want you to see that there are some connections that are made here and some of the consistencies of what they believe and some of the variations. Now, I identified several key figures as we are setting the stage for our honest look at Hebrew Israelites. There are a few more, but you've probably heard a lot, and I don't want to overwhelm you with too much more, so we're going to save that for next time. But before we close this service, I must provide a high-level history from the Bible. Why? Because if the Bible is not our foundation and frame of reference, there's no way to honestly determine whether or not these people are in alignment with the Word of God, or if you are. Okay. After Yahweh Elohim created Adam and Eve, one male and one female, this means there's only one kind of race. Remember, he made everything reproduced after its own kind. So one male, one female made the human race. There's only one race of people. We are not racially divided in any way, shape, or form unless you're something other than a human being. So all humans are of the same race. Yahweh placed a garden where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers were located, what we know as Mesopotamia today. You'll find two of those four rivers mentioned in Genesis chapter 2, verse 14. Now, after the man and the woman failed to follow Yahweh's instruction concerning eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and some people, with the help of the Nephilim, create a race of people that must be removed from the earth. That's the Nephilim. The fallen ones made it with humans, and the result was God said, we ain't having this. And so he said, I'm wiping off I'm erasing everything except for 8 people and a number of animals, each after their own kind, and I'm going to start this over. So Noah, the 10th generation from Adam, not that long, right? With his family, is chosen to survive this cataclysmic global flood. Yes, it happened all over the world. Why? Because the water reached several feet above the highest mountains. So there's no way you can do it in one area and not affect the entire world. After which, the ark they were in, that they were preserved in, it rested. We read Mount Ararat, but it's actually the mountains of Ararat. They are northeast of this land known as Mesopotamia. You find that in Genesis 8, chapter 8, verse 4. Then As Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, began to repopulate the earth, they migrated from the east. Genesis 11:2. Some Bibles read to the east, but it's actually in Hebrew from the east, which makes sense. If the mountains of Ararat are northeast of Mesopotamia, they're coming from the east into the land of Mesopotamia. Genesis 10:8-12 mentions several cities around Babylon and Assyria. Instead of spreading it out to cover the earth as Yahweh instructed Adam to do and then instructed Noah to do, instead of these people doing that, they tried to stay in one area, build a city and a tower, and make a name for themselves in or near Babel in Mesopotamia. There's a reason I keep saying this land place. Here, Yahweh calls them to have multiple languages, most likely by family groups. We find this in Genesis 11:7-9. And they began to move to other geographical locations by family, language, and they became a goy, G-O-Y, goy. That's the Hebrew word for a nation. And what is a nation? It's a people group. Same race, just different groupings of people. Noah's son Shem was the ancestor of all the sons of Eber, his descendant, from where we get the name Hebrew. We're going to pause at Abram right now because he was the first person referred to as a Hebrew. And I know you're wondering, how do we put all this together? Well, there are a few more pieces we need to add to the puzzle. And then as we begin to build it, you'll begin to understand the frame of reference that a person who professes to be a Hebrew Israelite, where they're coming from, and how you can effectively communicate with them from a biblical perspective. And next time, I know some of you are looking forward to this, and I know why, but we're going to take a look at some of the Black Panther-like militant groups, like the Israelite School of Universal Practical Knowledge, ISUPK, the Israel United in Christ, the IUIC, and the Sakari. If you've never heard of them, oh my goodness. And what is it about this Deuteronomy 28? Who is cursed? After we go through some of this, we'll begin to learn who Israel is. Shalom. Let's pray. Shabbat shalom. Have a great week.